Hey everyone, it's Rob, and thanks for listening in today. I greatly appreciate your time. Today is a lesson about social justice and diversity. My guest is Stephen Lewis. Stephen is an award-winning architect with background in both the public and private sector. Currently, he is a principal with ZGF Architects, where he leads the Los Angeles office's urban design practice. He also spent time in Detroit, where he was appointed by Mayor Mike Dugan as urban design director of the city's central region. Detroit is my hometown, and I was witness to the amazing progress Stephen led there. Most of all, Stephen is a facilitator of partnerships and alliances between groups and individuals who seek to use architecture and design to affect positive change in our world. So many nuggets during our conversation. So, please enjoy my chat with Stephen. Steve, how are you today? Great to see you.
Rob, I'm fine. How are you?
Doing well in our new world, our new COVID world.
Yeah, you can say that again. Or not.
Or not, right? We were talking a bit before we got started here. Tell me again about the background that you have.
Well, it's interesting. It's almost like it was scripted for this moment that we're in our society. But I'm the oldest of four kids, son of an architect, myself now an architect, and my dad as a Black man founding a firm in 1970 in New York City. I was a teenager, a fly on the wall for the sort of launch of that practice and the good, the bad, and the ugly that I witnessed as a young person very close to him. And those, I would say, a group of Black architects found the ability to launch themselves away from the firms that they had been working for and start their own practices in the early 1970s, largely due to a change in HUD policy, Housing and Urban Development, where they began to reinvest in inner city areas, which translated into renovating existing older buildings. My dad, having grown up in Harlem, put his flag down to be a key driver of the sort of reimagining of Harlem, not for a new population, but for those who historically had lived there. And those were the early days of meetings among what then was called the New York Coalition of Black Architects, NYCOBA, which today still exists as a chapter of our larger organization, NOMA, which is a National Organization of Minority Architects. When I would go to those early meetings with him, and I would hear all of the anecdotes and stories that were shared among those architects about the kinds of challenges, put it mildly, that they were up against and that they would face, I think my social consciousness within the practice, within the field, was steeled during those times, and it just became ingrained in who I am, such that going through college at Syracuse, which is a majority institution, I was one of just a small cohort of Black students there, and that experience was quite different than my colleagues who chose to attend historically Black colleges. There are over 100 historically Black colleges in America. Only 7 of them have accredited architecture programs, and those 7 schools account for about 80% of students who ultimately graduate with degrees, and probably about 55% of all Black architects who go on and become licensed. So I was able to assimilate into the mold that anyone who entered architecture school in the 70s would get pounded into, but at the same time maintain my identity and my pride in my identity. And that was easy because we were sort of emerging out of the 60s civil unrest, civil rights period, and being the oldest in a household where it was front and center every day for my parents. Of course, I had this awakening and this awareness at a young age. And I carried with me, my James Brown philosophy that I'm Black and I'm proud. So there's a certain joy in acknowledging our culture, and you see among Black people as we relate to one another, there's a sort of, if you haven't been exposed or immersed in that culture, often you'll sit and scratch your head and wonder what's going on here. I have a great anecdote I'll share with you in a second about in this current frame. But anyway, I went on to work for my dad for some years and ultimately established a firm just like his. He had two partners, both Black guys. I ended up with two Black partners, and we built a firm in 1984. And for 20 years, I was in the trenches with those guys until I had an opportunity to join Ed Feiner, who started who really elevated the GSA's Design Excellence Program in Washington, D.C. So picked up, moved to D.C., did 4 years with the feds, which was remarkable because I had exposure to the best architects in the country who were competing for federal commissions. I also noticed, though, immediately that none of my folks were even trying to go after this work, even though many were qualified as firm owners to pursue this work. And it was because they had a traditional idea of how those kinds of selections were made. Whoever cuts down the most trees gets the job, and prints the most pages. Quite frankly, in that time that they had streamlined and into a very elegant process how a firm would apply for a job and be selected. So you just really needed a 1/4 of an inch thick lead designer's portfolio. They really wanted to see what the design mind was like. You figured if you were a great designer and we award you this project, even if you're a single person operation, you can go down the street to one of the big firms and have them, partner with you, and they can do the heavy lifting of production, working drawings, and so forth. So anyway, I did that for 4 years, and then while there, I made it my business with their sort of sanction to go out and visit the offices of the most prominent African American owned architecture firms in an attempt to convince them that they should, in fact, go after this work. After all of our tax dollars are paying for these beautiful, gorgeous buildings. And so we had some success. It's still a big mountain to climb. And that mountain is reflective of a lot of what's come to light in the last couple of months, just in terms of the structural inequality, where doesn't have to be any overt sort of racist acts to limit people in their aspiration, but it's really built into the structures of everything from who's making those decisions to disqualifiers like, don't bother applying if you haven't done a $20 million project, 5 $20 million projects in the last 5 years, So I think that rethinking that entire process, continuing to rethink it is important. But back to the cultural sort of exchange piece. Currently, I work with ZGF Architects in their Los Angeles office. The firm is about 750 people. We have 6 offices around the country, well, 1 in Vancouver and 5 in the US. And the managing partner, my friend Ted Hyman, we were together in New Orleans in 2016 or 2015, the end of 2015, and I was invited to do a keynote for the AIA Large Firm Roundtable, this group of the 55 to 60 largest firms in the country in New Orleans. And after the event, we went out for lunch to a restaurant. And as we walked into the restaurant, a Black family was walking by us, and they were leaving. And I did the sort of perfunctory nod of acknowledgement, and they nodded back at me. And we took a few steps, and Ted said, "You know those people? You know people everywhere. Do you know those people?" I was like, "No, I saw them, and they saw me, and that's what that whole thing is about." And ever since then, Ted, who's Jewish, whenever he sees Black folks now, he'll do his little nod, and then he'll like try to walk away from him, like what's wrong with him. But his heart is sincere, and I told him as long as that's the case, I said ultimately, and as a photographer, an avid photographer myself, my motto is, you get back what you put out, and you can achieve that idea that I see you, regardless, across racial lines. And I think that's part of how we're going to sort of build on where we've come to now and solve this mess. It's going to take generations still, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. I read a quote in an architecture magazine called Ness Magazine, where you were speaking about an adage which is nothing about us is without us, it is for us. And then you say, which is a beautiful concept for true engagement. And I was wondering if you could share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's my favorite thing to recite. Nothing about us without us is for us. And that was the mantra that we used in Detroit when I was urban design director for Central Detroit, as we went out into neighborhoods who for decades had been disinvested and had lost all sort of trust in the city government. By standing with them and making that proclamation, they were stunned at first and they loved the meaning of it. It's so simple and yet so powerful. And we worked hard in a humble way to live into those words. And what we were able to do, of course, not universally, but in large measure in Detroit in a short span of three and a half years, and I was there for 2.5 of those years, we as a planning department, ethnically reflective of the city, which is an 83% Black city, we were able to have sort of conversations with members of those communities that not everyone could have, in a manner, in a way in which not everyone can have them. And the outgrowth of that was a buzz that just began to happen. And there were neighborhoods who were not being attended to in this sort of first wave of rebuilding infrastructure in neighborhoods, who to this day remain very angry, and if they saw me, they wouldn't be happy. But so many of the neighborhoods acknowledge us in the work we've done. In fact, one woman in the area where Henry Ford Hospital and the Motown Museum and all this catalytic energy is happening, she pretty much used to heckle me at every community meeting. And I'd go, oh, we're trying, we're doing it. And there were a few people who had reputations within the planning department. They'd almost like follow you from neighborhood to neighborhood just to be at meetings and heckle you. But when the word went out that I was leaving, I got the most beautiful email from her saying, oh, you can't go, you just come to, you're a great punching bag, But I'm very proud of that work. As many different things as I've done, I've facilitated building a community center in Khayelitsha Township in South Africa with 9 Harvard students, which has made a tremendous impact in that small community, to really promoting the summer camp for inner city kids called Project Pipeline within our NOMA organization that runs in about 12 or 13 chapter cities around the country and is bringing many Black and brown children into the awareness and hopefully the love of what architecture offers. So
I read that you feel there are 2 concurrent pandemics that we're doing battle with right now, COVID and systemic racism. And I'm wondering if you can explain what you mean by that.
Sure. Well, I wrote an article as we've been isolated in our homes, taking daily walks, and well, what else am I going to do? And there was a 2-month period where I was furloughed, I guess you'd say. So I had a lot of time and I thought a lot, and then I started writing. And I wrote a piece about the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on us as humans. And I posited, well, designers are racing to be out in front, being acknowledged and recognized as being sort of most innovative in terms of how our world is going to be changed to address these issues of physical distancing and so forth. And I just wondered whether that was opportunistic and whether we were in the process of redefining a reality, a physical reality, we were putting at risk our humanity. And I believe that if we took a fraction of the cost to reconfigure our environment and devoted it to building a robust healthcare system, that any new pandemic that arises we'd be able to jump on top of quickly and get control of, and not put our whole way of living and whole way of needing as humans interaction and contact at risk. So that was written and about to be published by the Los Angeles AIA when George Floyd was murdered and that incident happened. And the executive director called me and said, hey, would you consider, do you want to amend what you've written to now include this incident and what its implications are? And I could not refuse that. It wasn't like I wanted more work to sit behind the desk and really rack my heart and my head to figure out what to say. But I was thankful for that opportunity because it did give me an opportunity to kind of think in terms of how that the illness of COVID and the illness of racism both have dramatic effects on our society, our country, and our world for that matter. And so weaving those together, coming through my persona and sensibilities, was more about how do we leverage this moment to be the best humans we can be and to have the best society we can have, and what does that really involve and mean and entail? And it leads me to the advice that I've been offering to many as I've been appearing on panels and being drawn into discussions and helping to lead ZGF through these and helping them navigate through these unprecedented times. And that's that what is a firm or a company other than a collection of individuals? And if we do not address understanding, which leads to empathy, which leads to compassion at the level of the individual, then anything that an organization tries to build on that frame will be unstable. So to have a solid foundation upon which to build a path to a better future, you have to have solidarity to a degree among the individuals who make up that company. And therein lies a big challenge, because not everybody's ready for this. Not everybody's ready for this moment. More people are than have been in a long time. And because much of the protest is being led by young people and many young white people, it presents to us who've been there before in the 60s and who understand the structural inequality and how the knee on George Floyd's neck is such an incredibly horrific metaphor for, as Al Sharpton used it at George Floyd's funeral ceremony, that there have been knees on our necks around every corner of opportunity. So I think that I'm focusing on strategies and ways to build understanding and empathy at an individual level as a place to start. I truly believe that if we don't make that the number one priority, then again, all of the activities you do are just sort of disconnected from people. Once you understand me, once you've walked in my shoes, you attain a level of empathy and care for me, so that when you see something happening to me, either directly or indirectly, it hurts you and you will do something about it. And if we can arrive, anywhere close to that as a majority of the society, then we truly will be on that path.
Mm-hmm. How long will that take?
Probably, well, look, it took 401 years to get us where we are today. It's going to take probably, I really won't say, because it's going to be gradual. It's going to be incremental. And just like Barack Obama was elected president, none of us thought we'd see that in our lifetimes. We did, but we also see what that did for us. The backlash has gotten us what we've had for the last 4 years. And so that just means that we're still far from the goal that at least hopefully 60% of us have.
That this combination of COVID and people getting out into the community to stand up for something that's very important to not just our country, but even as you see things going on internationally. If this combination is accelerating a more tolerant society, that empathy that you talk about, that compassion that we need to start having for each other, has it brought it to the forefront and accelerated the conversation and the awareness for people that weren't thinking about it?
Yeah, well, there are these two groups of people in the country. There's a group that is quote unquote woke now, and there's a group that doesn't care. And there's a correlation between those groups and who's wearing masks and who's not, who's out in the streets protesting and who's not, who is grabbing Black people in a park and jamming them up against a tree and threatening to get a noose, and only to be rescued by, white brothers and sisters there, and people who would be the ones doing the rescuing. So it's complicated, but then again, it's really simple, right? We use complication to obfuscate the simple reality that you're either anti-racist or you're not. And if you're not, that just means you're complicit in the system that we've called and named for what it is: restrictive, disenfranchising, racist. Silence is corrosive, no longer acceptable. What is everyone who cares about this willing to do on a daily basis? I've been using health analogies to help explain what this journey is going to have to be if it's going to be successful. And 43 years ago, one day, I had to stick an insulin needle in my arm. I was told I had type 1 diabetes and that was going to be the way it is. And I stuck that needle in my arm, and metaphorically, I've stuck it in my arm every day since for 43 years. For the last 20 or some odd years, I have an insulin pump, so it's a little more forgiving. But the idea that you have to radically change behavior overnight in order to survive. And it wasn't perfect. I still wanted the same food the next day that I had eaten the day before that my mother put in front of me, but it was a waffle with syrup on it, and as much as I wanted it, I couldn't eat it. And some days I did, which means that you can make mistakes and you can recover from them when you're reminded that if you want to live, you've got to change behaviors. And I think that has some resonance in this moment, because you never stop taking insulin for the rest of your life until, of course, hopefully they'll still cure it. Too late for a waffle from Mom. She left us 2 years ago. Got the recipe. And there's a reminder every day. I have a continuous glucose monitor, and if my blood sugar after a meal goes above a certain threshold, I get an alarm. If it goes down, if it's crashing, I get a bigger alarm because that's more dangerous. And again, metaphorically, we will get these alarms going off. And what we do in response to them and how effectively and robustly we do it is that's going to answer your question about the timeline. How long is this, right? I do think that ultimately, if enough direct action happens in a concentrated enough time frame, then it will present a tipping point where public policies and practices, and then ultimately social interaction and acceptance will flood through and enable us to claim a new chapter in who we are, approaching that idyllic society that was written so eloquently and beautifully, unfortunately, but not intended for all. But if we want to live into it, then those are the kind of variables. I have this other metaphor that I use that seems to be effective, and that's just in terms of those people who, I'm not racist. Okay, what does that mean? That means, I see Sandra Bland get hit on the news, murdered, whatever, and it's, oh God, that's terrible, and then it's back to work. The moment you achieve self-awareness racially as a Black person, whether you're 2 years old or 10, whenever, you see two universes. They're parallel to one another. There's a Black universe and a white universe. And by necessity, you have to navigate seamlessly between those two universes, so that when you're in the white universe, you maybe code switch and you're acceptable there, and then you flow back into the Black universe and you restore your soul with joyousness and banter and all of the things that we gen up for ourselves as ways to amuse ourselves, each other, and so forth. And it's just a beautiful thing. Well, white people don't have a racial awareness generally. They are. what they are. And their life that's life. When George Floyd was murdered, I'm a Trekkie, so here we go. A wormhole opened up between those two universes, and all of the white folks were sucked into the Black universe, and they, for an instant, saw everything that we have seen and always seen, and they felt it. And at that moment, the wall between those universes crumbled, and we're all in this one place right now where there's no going back. We've seen it, named it for what it is, and now is our opportunity to react to it in a way that will hopefully have us evolve to that more perfect union.
Mm-hmm. That's good. That's good. You talked about some time that you spent in Detroit, and I'm from the general area of Detroit, from the suburbs, and I live downtown as well. I'm curious, from a professional standpoint, how can thoughtful urban design initiatives help bring us closer together as a community?
Yeah, I have to give a lot of credit to Dan Gilbert, who is the head of Quicken Loans and owns the Cleveland Cavaliers, and now he moved back into his native Detroit downtown, brought Quicken into downtown with about, I think at the time, maybe 5,000 workers. And when he came, he bought 80 buildings in downtown Detroit for a song. And then he just went about spending tens of millions of his own dollars to improve the public realm and to renovate these buildings. Part of that, working with the Downtown Detroit Partnership, they reclaimed some street territory in Cadillac Square, right in the sort of epicenter of downtown. And there's an area where food trucks come every day. There is a picnic table area where people can sit and eat their lunches. There is an area where they put the portable basketball hoops up. And the message was that these amenities are for all Detroiters. And there's this really wonderful photo that I use in a lot of my lectures where I'm talking about that and that very issue in Detroit that shows this black guy dribbling the ball big in the foreground of the photograph and then downtown in the background and whatnot. And this was the reality of every day. Now, Detroit, again, is an 83% Black city, so the preponderance of people around, may be Black, but not in the downtown. Those 5,000 people that Dan Gilbert brought in to work at Quicken were mostly young white millennials, right? And so immediately people in the surrounding neighborhoods, which of course you're familiar with, who haven't had any sunshine in 40 years, immediately assume this is for them, not for us. And Mayor Duggan, ironically, the first white mayor in Detroit in decades, made it his primary purpose to give evidence to those people in those neighborhoods that this recovery in Detroit is in fact all about them. And by creating these intentional collisions of culture in high visibility areas like the downtown, that's demonstrating the rhetoric. When you demonstrate it, it becomes believable. And some of the community neighborhood meetings were just funny as I reflect on them, because you'd have these boisterous, community leaders who would be shouting at you about what they need and want. And we're like, yeah, we just said we're here to give you that. And they were like, and it just keeps shouting at you. And finally they go like, that's what you're asking for is what we just said. And then they're like, they don't believe it, because it's like Charlie Brown in the football, And I did hear a really great quote, which I loved the other day. And it's like, Charlie Brown, Lucy can only pull the football away from Charlie Brown so many times before he gets up and punches her in the face. So I love the imagery of that.
That's good.
But yeah, it's a long slog there, especially with COVID further setting back their economy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we rubbed two nickels together to make a dime. I mean, the mayor, it was really hard. In fact, as we were undertaking these planning exercises, looking along the Detroit riverfront, which was probably the highest visibility project that I managed while I was there and the most important one, where Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, SOM, was the consultant hired to do the urban design and whatnot. And we worked beautifully together for what came up, what resulted in a 30-year vision for 22 million square feet of new development along the riverfront. And we were all proud of it. We were all like excited. It looked great, all the renderings. And the mayor saw the presentation and he just said, only the things in this study that can be implemented in 3 years are what you're allowed to show the public. And we're like, what? What a valuable lesson we learned there.
Mm-hmm.
The public has a short attention span. If you show them something that's 10 years down the line, in year 3, they're peppering you for not delivering. And you said, well, I said it was 10 years old. No, it doesn't matter. So we disciplined ourselves to take improvements, however modest, that were attainable given the limited funding resources and so forth, whether it was bike lanes in a neighborhood or whether it was a city park that was improved in the heart of a neighborhood, which we believed was the key to any successful neighborhood, was having a great city park available to the neighbors. And strategies like that, those are the things that helped us lean into the, if nothing about us without us is for us mantra, right?
Yeah. So as the story moves forward, Dan Gilbert's enterprises, so to speak, now have about 18,000 people. And I was curious your thoughts on how business plays a part in the community coming together and what businesses can do better to cultivate a greater sense of community.
Yeah, I think many businesses are following a script of how they build diversity within their organizations, how they provide opportunities for advancement for people of color within their organizations. But I think what's missing in large part, and if it's not adjusted, then I think there's been enough evidence of kind of false starts on trying to remedy this systemic problem that it will, have the same result. But that is going back to the human interaction piece. When Dan Gilbert or any other CEO of a major company marches with protesters or goes to dinner at my house and wants to know me, until that happens, it's going to be, how much do I have to put, how many of my chips do I have to put over on this part of the board to calm this down so I can go back to business as usual over here? And so since the people, many of the people leading these companies are of a different generation than the ones who are out in the streets demanding, change, a great deal of uncertainty is created as a result of that. So I cannot predict it. I can only prescribe for those corporations a way that they can get both and in a better way. You have to remember also that the Black society is not immediately ready, as slaves were not ready upon being freed in 1863, and then the emancipation final one in 1865, to flip a switch and become fully vested citizens, right? But in fact, that 10-year Reconstruction period saw so many gains and so much advance that white folks had to shut it down and impose the Jim Crow laws. And we haven't recovered from any of that as a segment of the society. So that's hard work to do. You have to be courageous and willing to peel back those layers and get to the real on what's going on, to be able to just say, wow, I'm so sorry that happened to you. And it's not saying that I had something to do with it. Maybe my ancestors did, but I now have this sense of empathy. I want to help correct this. I want to help move us forward in a way. And then there are all the mechanical steps around that: unconscious bias training, hiring, interns from historically Black colleges, creating pathways to leadership within corporate organizations, but doing so with a interest, curiosity, if not ultimately a reverence for understanding different cultures. You know, and when I had my own practice with my partners, we had a very international office, and we got as large at one point as I think 30 people was as big as we got. But we had, you know, white folks, Indian folks, Malaysian folks, we had everybody, and we do these, I like to cook too, so we would do these potlucks. And there's no better way to get introduced to a culture than through food. And there's no better way to broker differences than over a table of food. So those are practical lessons, and you know, they may not be the most revolutionary, innovative things, but they hold true. So I have you know, a list of recommended actions that people can take to step toward this better future. And eating with folks is a big one of them.
What are a couple others?
Going to an event or an activity with a person of another culture. Let's talk about Black folks now, because that's what we're talking about. So Rob, you come with me and I take you to my Saturday morning basketball game where there's one other white guy and 10 Black guys, or no other white guys and 10 Black guys. And we proceed to the great equalizer, which is who can jump, who can shoot, who can block a shot, who can defend. And, you know, you play hard. And when it's over, there's a kind of bond, right? So I think just going to the movies to watch a movie that you're uncomfortable watching with that audience, that you might watch on your own and maybe would have laughed at things yesterday, but today you're seeing them differently and you're going, oh my God, you know? So it really has to do with opportunities, any opportunity to walk in the shoes of the other, to truly try to do that, to feel the impact of what, you know, these people have been telling you about for decades. I'll disclose. So when I joined ZGF in September of 2018, I'm sorry. There was a great deal of excitement and interest in what I was going to bring culturally and in terms of helping them do a lot of what they're committed to do now. And I said a lot of things and I acted in a certain way, and I got basic support. You know, oh, you want to fly to North Carolina to visit Phil Freelon's office? It was one of our best and brightest Black architects. Unfortunately, we lost last year to Lou Gehrig's disease. But anyway, and they were like, okay, yeah, you want early boarding? Sure, right, you know, very supportive. But then I got let go in April as part of the COVID panic. Future's uncertain. We're paying you a lot. We got to let you go. Okay. 2 months went by. A lot happened in the middle of that, which was about me reaching out, saying, I understand tough decisions. I left a lot of love in that office. I still have it. Let's not let that interfere. We'll go on and build a friendship, because that's my job. And when George Floyd was murdered, I got a phone call asking for advice about how to address the firm quickly, in a meaningful way. I gave it freely for an hour. 2 days later, I got a phone call saying, realize we made a mistake. Will you come back and will you help play a different role and help us navigate through what we're going through? I've been back a month. It's been wonderful. It's been incredible. But I have said the exact same thing that I said when I joined, in the exact same manner, simply being heard differently today.
Mm-hmm.
So folks are woke.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you for sharing that. Is there a community that comes to your mind, really anywhere in the world? So we do have a worldwide audience that listens, that comes together almost seamlessly, where there aren't these kind of challenges and issues.
I know nowhere where the complete society has consciously and intentionally addressed this issue and made it their business to transcend it. I know that some Scandinavian countries where Black folks are pretty rare, the Black folks that are there are accepted and are treated equally, but I don't have that firsthand experience. I look at people like Marcus Samuelsson, the chef, who was adopted by a Swedish family and raised in Sweden, who is connected very much to his Ethiopian roots, and I believe, and he could probably answer that question better than I can, but it's strata and layers, and I think it's relatable to age and innocence that comes with youth. People who are young play together, they have no awareness and consciousness of racial disparity. And, I grew up in Long Island, and when I was in elementary school, we were about 50, the class I went through school with was about 50-50 Black, white. And I would go to lunch at this one friend's house. And as we became older, I was no longer welcomed at that house, not because of him, but, and so there's so much hope and potential in the untarnished youth that are innocent, right? But learned behavior. So, if you asked me before how long is it going to take, well, these generational rounds of purging, that almost assumes that there's a benign indifference to race and that it can purge itself out. But we have to understand that there's still a large percentage, larger than it's comfortable to talk about, people who believe that this country was, and then, on a global lens, Black people globally are oppressed, repressed, suppressed, and that this idea of white power, and so many of the people who are against the inclusive society are afraid. They only see things in terms of white power, or if not, then, oh my God, Black power. And what they fail to recognize is that right in the middle of that is equality, right? And so fear of loss, and fear being the operative word, something that our president has stoked among his base, is corrosive and cancerous. And it's going to take generations still to weed it out, to purge it, because there's a group of young people of those families who have climbed the ladder on the shoulders of all of those people who are mentors to them, parents, peers, and so forth. And some of those people have reached that point on the ladder where, through world events, have to acknowledge that it's leaning against the wrong wall. They've spent their life climbing this ladder. It's leaning on the wrong wall. What do? Do you have the courage to first accept that, and then climb down, reposition the ladder, and start another climb? I mean, that's a lot to ask of people. And that's not mine. That's Stephen Covey's from the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I paraphrased him about the ladder leaning on the wrong wall. But I never forgot that. Of all of the things he wrote about in that book, that's the one thing that really stuck with me, because we evolve until we die, and that's a great opportunity. But if you just stay in the shell, you're wasting your life. And I love, the Kennedy quote: "We do these things not because they are easy, but because they are hard. They steal us and make us better."
Thank you for that. I think that's a good way to finalize our conversation, which could go on for hours, quite frankly. Steve, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me on the pod today. I greatly appreciate your time. I know how valuable it is.
Oh, no, thanks for the opportunity, Rob. I love the conversation, and that's exactly what it was. So I appreciate it.
Awesome. And for all the loyal listeners who joined us today, I greatly appreciate you spending time. And we wish you all much love and gratitude.